to begin with, sir, for the discussion sake, can you just tell in short what do you consider first line, second line, third line therapy? So, can you just tell in short so that we will take the discussion further based on
Okay.
that?
Okay, so that's fairly clear and easy. I can begin by saying that ADT, androgen deprivation, by orchectomy or by giving any of the agonists or antagonists which we have got, that is not adequate therapy for any patient today of cancer prostate. Monotherapy should not be considered as the treatment of choice. That is my first thought. Now, when you have to add a second drug, what should I use? So again, I have to look at basically three options. Am I looking at docetaxel, or am I looking at abiraterone, or am I looking at enzalutamide? How should I select these? So the first is the patient okay for considering chemotherapy? Then chemotherapy is especially beneficial with large volume metastasis. If the patient has got a good performance status, large volume metastasis, presence in outside of lymph nodes or in viscera, then you should probably give symptomatic with these metastasis, you should probably consider docetaxel upfront. But many patients will be very chary to start on chemotherapy. Then you have to see you have to balance yourself between Abi and Enza. How do I choose between Abi and Enza? The choice would be availability, cost, and bear in mind what next. Because if I start Abi, then you've now seen from so much data that the drug after Abi is enzalutamide, and the reverse is not true. So if I start today upfront with enzalutamide, then maybe I will not be able to introduce as second line abiraterone. Then straight away I have to think of cabazitaxel. All right. So now if I have sorted out my sequence with the patient, then I tell him, okay, upfront dosi and Abi to start with, or dosi or Abi to start with. And if you progress on dosi, then I can introduce Abi. But if you progress on Abi as a first line, then I have to add Enza. If I've exhausted this, now in my third line, I now know from data if it is a slow progressing growth tumor, then I can continue with docetaxel or abiraterone. But if it is rapidly growing, then I have to bring in here cabazitaxel right away.
Okay.
Right. So this is our standard framework of thinking based on these trials which we have got from November 19.
Okay. I also welcome Dr. Rahul Yadav and to open up the discussion further. So, sir, as I could conclude, as you're saying, if a patient comes with any metastatic disease, which was a conventional doing that we do either orchidectomy or we give some leuprolide and we start bicalutamide, so alone this is not sufficient.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
In fact, I want to say that bicalutamide is actually hardly ever used nowadays in this scenario of metastatic cancer prostate. The survival benefit in the OS was it was less than 5%. So this total androgen blockade concept has not really proven very beneficial at all.
Okay, just before we move to after this initial scenario, regarding castration, we are seeing a lot of literature that we compare a lot between conventional orchidectomy surgery versus medical orchidectomy. So do you really find any difference as such in your practice?
So let us just say what is the evidence first before we talk about practice. So the evidence today is yes, that the progression because of FSH surgeries which are coming with the orchectomy or with the antagonist, this is what you have to consider. And there is now, at least in 4 studies, again, close to level 1, if not level 1 evidence, that yes, the cardiac morbidity in long term, in about 10 years, is going to be significantly higher. Shockingly, there were 2 articles which said even inside of a year, the morbidity measured up in these patients was significantly higher in the agonists versus the antagonists arm. So I think the choice depends on what kind of patient you had. Bad cardiac risk patients, you must counsel them that the antagonist therapies are probably beneficial. The problem is the cost and the monthly injection. Still, you don't have depot preparation for long therapy. So you have to go with monthly preparation. So these are the considerations.
Dr. Rahul, you want to?
It's regarding when we have exhausted each and everything, right? We always say that just move to cabazitaxel. Can you share your experience on cabazitaxel in some patients?
So see, it depends on what kind of setting you're working in, Rahul. So in the kind of setting which I work, I do not give the carboxytaxel. In fact, I don't even give the docetaxel. I I refer my patient to the med-onc people. Why do I do that? It's not that we can't do it. The problems are, first is that you should have the clinical experience to deal with the problems of dosi or carboxytaxel, and mainly we are concerned with the hematological complications, dealing with febrile neutropenia, ICU admission, sepsis, handling this blood products, handling the infection. These are some things which you and I, as urologists or let's say urooncologists, do not have the time and do not have the training depth. The second is the implications which are possibly medical legal, that if this patient does die of chemo related complications, it may be difficult for you to look after these the medical legal aspects of it. So I, at least in my practice, I'm in a corporate hospital. I prefer that my med-onc people handle this. The patient is referred to them for these therapies. It may vary in other centers. Some urologists are very comfortable to handle chemo at their own ends. But yes, you need to be trained adequately to handle the complications. And that's where I think it depends on your background training.
So Dr. Nitesh Jain has asked, is there any role of Honven in current setting, current era?
Yeah. See, all of us are using Honvan, and that is a question which will always come up. There is no evidence, but we all know Honvan works. And when we have nothing, and especially when patients' affordability is a big question, our default go-to drug is Honvan. So yes, even I use it. I use it quite often. But if I'm asked for the evidence, I only have clinical evidence. I do not have data to show for it. Certainly, it has been used. I think all of us are using it. But IV Honvan, I believe, is not easily available now. The tablets are available.
So do you, because it's a cheap drug also, so do you, many of our patients really can't afford, I mean, the guideline may be something, but we find that patient just can't afford it. So there are scenarios that we have to use it by compulsion because we can't use it anything else.
So what we have done, some things have been done which are off-label. For example, the Ablatron therapy, you can half the price by adding that fatty meal thing. So you tell him that instead of 1 gram, you use only 500 milligrams, and you take it with your breakfast with some fatty things like lassi or butter or something of that nature. But they are non-standardized meals. So it is only that you're trying to reduce cost of therapy. Similarly, enzalutamide, instead of 160, you can go down to 80 milligrams if the patient is not able to afford. And especially in an elderly person, it may actually be safer to use enza at a smaller dose of 80 milligrams rather than the full 160 milligrams. I agree. These are cost cutting consideration, especially because therapy is going for a long time. And this is precisely why I was trying to stress on the fact that upfront dosi in a hormone sensitive scenario is only 6 cycles. So give the 6 cycles of dosi and you're done. In most of our settings, I think the calculated price for one dosi admission, one cycle, which is 3 weekly, that means in 18 weeks you've finished your therapy, it will amount to about 6,000 a month, which is not very, very much compared to here 10,000 every month we're using.
Sir, you have shown a light on M0 and M plus CRPC. Yeah. In CRPC, usually things have been exhausted over a period of time. But the main problem lies when a patient of oligometastatic and metastatic, widespread metastatic prostate cancer comes to the OPD and first time detected. What's your thought on starting initial line of treatment for such kind of patients?
So let me understand what you're saying. There's a patient who is de novo come to you with widespread metastasis. So
and
this
oligometastatic.
Yeah, metastasis, oligo or widespread, whatever, oligo or large volume metastasis. So this patient is not hormone refractory because this is a new patient come to you. So he's a hormone sensitive category, right? You're going to de novo start your therapy. So this is a different scenario compared to the second scenario which you're saying that you've already treated him and he's already castrate refractory. You've confirmed that his testosterone is below 50. Yet he has got multiple meds which are progressing over 1 or 2 observations which are made. So completely different 2 scenarios. So first case scenario, see initially in HSPC, there was differentiation in high volume, low volume based on the chartered study, right? But what came out in the STAMPEDE study when they did the subgroup analysis and also in the enzalutamide sum, like the Enzamed study, they have looked at differentiation between high and low volume, then lymph node mets only, bony mets only, and try to see whether there was a difference in the response rates. And they have come out with the conclusion that it works equally well whether you use it in high and low volume and whether it is bony or visceral. Okay, so we started off on the presumption in the charter trial and latitude trial that they only work in the high volume disease. Today we believe it is not true. So we can use docetaxel, we can use enzalutamide irrespective of high or low volume disease, or even abiraterone for that matter. So then question comes, what is better? Head on head, is Abi better than Enza, better than docetaxel? So there's only one study which I know of, which was again a subgroup analysis in STAMPEDE. Here 2 arms were studied, docetaxel on one side and abiraterone on the other side. Again, instinctively feel that the dosi patients, because cytotoxic therapy, their responses should be better, but no, they are shown equivalent results. So at the end of the day, I think it depends on you. You can use each of these arms and they are equally efficacious.
So,
Sir, in
sir,
your
again,
practice-
okay, please.
Sir, regarding the similar question, in your practice, if a patient is capable of taking chemotherapy, means he is fit enough to take a chemotherapy with widespread or oligometastatic, what is your choice of treatment to begin with?
So different scenarios you're telling me. Widespread is not oligometastatic. Oligometastatic
Yes.
would be by definition less than 4 mets.
Yes.
Okay. So in less than 4 mets, again, first question will be, what if he's a good performance status patient? Then you have the whole thing open up to you exactly from the dosi to Abi to Enza, everything. So my preference is OPD treatment, OPD patient. I will tell him, okay, please start with abiraterone. Tablets to be taken at home and easy to manage. And today, with generics in the market, the cost of Abi is quite low. So my personal choice would be to go for Abi.
So there is a question again. So can one straightforward start with enzalutamide?
Yeah,
Dr.
you
Tanuj
can.
has asked.
Yes, you can. See, there are specific instances when you should start with enzalutamide. And what are those instances? The first is the patient is probably not fit for Abi or been, or maybe a little risk, because see, don't forget, Abi is not Abi. Abi is Abi with steroid. The steroid is there for the hypertension and hyperkalemia prevention, the secondary hypercorticism, which adrenolsteronism, which happens. So you have to bear that in mind. So if there's a patient who's a long-standing diabetic, poorly controlled diabetes, and now I'm going to give him steroid in addition, or that may create difficulty for the blood pressure and the blood sugar control. So here Enza may be in preference. Okay, so that could be a consideration.
But we have to see that later we can't use abiraterone after.
Second is the cost. So today the reality of Indian practice is that cost of enzalutamide is almost 3 times or 3.5 times the cost of abiraterone. The third consideration is that, yes, what next? Because with Enza, you will achieve more than a 40 to 50% response rate. But eventually we know it fails. Now, if Enza fails, then what next? Then your arms are tied a little bit, because now you have level 1 evidence which is telling you that Enza should not be followed up with Abi. So you have a problem there. So you have to bear in mind these factors. And yes, if these factors are considered and you find it's okay, please go ahead and use Enza. It is a good drug. It is a good drug, no doubt. There is no diet restriction. There is no steroid limitation on these patients. And even doses as low as 80 milligram are found quite effective. So Enza is a very good drug in that matter.
So Dr. Anil Allen sir has asked that, is there a role of combining abiraterone with docetaxel in hormone-sensitive prostate cancer as first line?
Okay, so this has not been proven as a category 1 recommendation. There are some studies where they have combined it, and they have also combined dosi and Enza also. The question is that if you exhaust all these at the first scenario, then sequencing may be a problem. This concept is the layering concept, which has come in recently, and people are inclined to use 2 or maybe 3 drugs altogether at the same time for maximum benefit. But we don't have level 1 evidence yet. One STAMPEDE subarm is basically combination of dosi Enza. So on the lines of what Dr. Ellis was just mentioning. but not category 1 yet.
Yeah, Dr. Rahul.
If we are doing some clinical trial, I mean, we can try all these things in a clinical trial setting. Yes, we can do it. What do you think about it?
I can. I don't disagree with you, but the first thing is that you have to let's say to design a trial on this kind of thing, you will require to decide what is your patient population, how much of data how many patients you need in this kind of a study, duration of study or endpoints to be defined. It will, and the cost of this kind of a thing, because at each point you will require massive support to handle all this kind of operation. So industry sponsored some kind of thing, yes, it may be possible. I think 2 or 3 centers there, Dr. Rajiv Sood RML Center, they are doing some trials. Rajiv Gandhi was member of 1 or 2 trials, but not many of us are involved in these trials.
So there is another question, sir. If we are already giving abiraterone or enzalutamide, do we have to continue with bicalutamide, or we can stop that?
So actually, let me say that bicalutamide was never part of the equation here.
Okay.
So in one simple question, if you're using bicalutamide, whether you need to continue it, I'd say yes, probably you continue it. But then why start it at the first instance? Because there is actually hardly any benefit from that. I personally have stopped use bicalutamide years back. There is no, in fact, none of the studies here have shown much benefit of adding bicalutamide anywhere.
So there's another question. What is the role of intermittent ADT, and what will be the scenario we can utilize it?
So intermittent ADT in the scenarios of both sensitive and refractory, both scenarios have been used. What was the setting? The setting was a patient very keen to preserve his sexual functionality. The second setting is that he has had a good response to ADT and the response has been sustained. And the third was that the duration that he's been on under ADT suppression. Now, each of these has to be considered in terms of what you are going to achieve. So, if the suppression has been for long, in fact, some studies have shown as little as 6 months. However, the standard teaching is that if it is less than 2 years and then you stop the ADT, then there may be a testosterone resurgence so that he regains sexual function. And also the sarcopenia and the muscle loss can be regained in that window period when the suppression has been removed, right? The problem is that many patients do not recover adequately. So your actual thought behind the recovery of ADT is not happening because their suppression never gets released because it's been suppressed for a long time. So that's one problem. Now, the second problem is that these patients then you have to monitor very closely and then empirically decide a point at which you will reintroduce the ADT. So say this PSA has dropped to a nadir of say 8 or 10, and then you monitor him and for a few months he remains stable at the same PSA level, it is fine. Empirically you have to decide, okay, nadir plus this much and then I restart the ADT. Now, when studies have been done to see what happens in the long term, you may get past 2 or 3 cycles of such intermittent therapy. But no matter what guideline you pick up, each of them has told us one thing, that the risk of METs is more. The second is that the overall survival is reduced to a small extent with intermittent. So this is the price the patient, if he's willing to undertake, yes, then you can go ahead and do ADT. So in my practice, whatever patients I've seen, only one patient has tried to use it. All the rest, when you convince them about the pros and cons, they stay on an ADT.
So Dr. Umesh Sharma has asked, is there any role of cardiac status in choosing between abiraterone and enzalutamide?
To a certain extent, yes. To a certain extent. See, I don't think that it immediately plays a role, at least in terms of the ABI or ENZA toxicity right at the outset. No, it would be primarily important in the later stages because you're going to go for a long duration. The ENZA, ABI I've already mentioned, the ENZA toxicity is predominantly neurological. elderly patient, Parkinsonism, dementia, history of falls, these are problematic on ENZA. But cardiac, no, I don't think immediately is of concern.
Again, there will be some maybe repetition of some part of the question. Anyways, I'm going to Dr. Rahul. You want to ask something?
Yeah. Sir, we always used to say that castration, LHRH agonist and antagonist have the same effect. If we see biochemically, sir, in castration, LHR and FSH levels are pretty high. In agonist, they are high, and in antagonist, they are not. And why we prescribe antagonist is because in cardiac patients, the atheromatous plaque has got FSH receptors. The prostate cancer has got FSH receptors. So, don't you feel the antagonist should be given in all should give benefit to each and every patient?
So, in fact, I think about 2 weeks back, there was a talk on one of the principal investigators who has gone into this, and he has presented data which actually tells us what you are saying, that the antagonists work better. There's no doubt about it. Does.
So
if the patient is affordable, I mean, we should go ahead with antagonist.
Yes, yes, certainly.
So will it be a good strategy, because obviously agonist costs less, so one can start with antagonist for initial few weeks and then go to, because this is also one strategy.
So this is what we do. See, even in the mandatory settings where there is a large volume mets which are potentially compressive in the spine, or he's got a large bulky prostate and he may obstruct. So these are scenarios where you will start with degarelix, no doubt. And after the first cycle is done and you are past the crisis point, maybe at the second or third month, you can convince the patient either get off degarelix and get it orchectomy done, or go ahead and use a cheaper agonist. So that's what we are doing routinely. Few patients are very happy with the response and they say, no, we stay on the same drug. That's fine.
Okay, so there's another question by Dr. Kaushik. I think it's not directly related to, but it is a common scenario which we see. If there is a PSA more than 100 and patient comes to us, should we always wait for the biopsy or should we even do a biopsy?
Oh, okay. So you're asking us that is biopsy mandatory before starting any cancer therapy? As a rule, almost always yes. I have said almost always because some scenarios you are not able to do a biopsy. Patient is extremely moribund. He has got a spinal compression, and you have done a PSA, it's very high, and you have done a bone scan or you have done a PSMA PET is positive. Now these are scenarios where you can start therapy directly without a biopsy and then contemplate a biopsy when you pass the crisis. So as a guideline, as a mandate, yes, always biopsy before treatment, with a few exceptions like what I have just mentioned.
And so again, see, if the patient comes say PSA 1200, 1300, and there's a scenario we have started with abiraterone, and we have done, we given agonist, and it has come down pretty well, 250. Then again, next month it comes down to 35, 40, but it is not going down. So should one really expect it to go down and continue with abiraterone, or does it require changing the drug?
So what you're asking is, how do you decide when to introduce the next line of therapy?
Yeah.
So the point is that one is that you're talking of what is the value of the nadir and how long the nadir has come in. Is it come in early? Has it come in late? So the answer is actually, let's take it one by one. The nadir, that is how low does it go and how long does it stay, is a prognostic factor of the efficacy of the drug. Even the first line, just giving the ADT, that has also very high prognostic value. So let me start with that value. So if you do an androgen ablation and after 6 months you look at the PSA, there has been a direct correlation with overall survival. So if you achieve a PSA of less than 4 compared to that of a patient who is less than 2 and then less than 0.2, so 3 categories you have got, and there is a huge difference in the overall survival. So if you go below 0.2, you have almost a 7-year metastasis-free survival. So that's with ADT alone, and this is in the EAU guidelines. You can see that. Now regarding the nadir which you achieve with AbbVie or ENZA or DOSI, the level at which it drops is very important. It gives you an understanding of how well the tumor has responded. But I will not directly straight away add the next sequence till the PSA response stays there. Whether it is at 10, whether it is at 20, or whether it is at 30. If it is a stable response on the PSA biochemically, that's one. Clinically, otherwise okay. And radiologically, you have repeated your scan after 3 months of therapy and you have found that the bone scan or the PSMA is stable, then you do not change your therapy. You just continue on the same therapy. It just gives you a little bit of a forewarning if their nadirs are not very low, that he is got an aggressive disease. He may be a candidate for early chemotherapy.
So in the same patient scenario, I would like to say that I did not change the drug, and the patient was so anxious, and he went to another clinician and he was switched to enzalutamide, and then it came to 6 or 7. So I mean, is it not coming to a better case scenario in terms of survival?
I am not saying no. It may show some response initially, but eventually it all peters down. Because this is not in few months that we're talking. You're looking at is what next and how long is the overall survival going to benefit or not going to benefit. So it is better to go with at least some guideline in therapy. Otherwise, you will be haywire. You start ABI, then you switch to Enza without a basis of that. You're going to exhaust your first line, second line drugs very quickly. And we don't have so many drugs with us right now. So in one short thing, if I have to answer, I think the best is what I mentioned in the last, which is get in all metastatic patients, if possible, his genetic assay. There are gene panels available with Core Diagnostics, with Lal Lab, which give you the presence of all these genes, the genetic abnormality. Let's not say genes, but the genetic abnormality. There, your pickup is not going to be very high. Currently, I think it's about 8 to 10% patients. But if you pick up those patients, then you have a sure shot therapy. For instance, BRCA2 there, you know that more than 70% of those guys are going to work very well with a PARP inhibitor. Okay, so that is your best hit rather than just at random choosing a drug.
So, sir, there is a question by, in fact, comment plus observation by Dr. Santosh Vangekar.
Yeah.
Saying that what extra precaution one should take while administering steroids along with abiraterone.
So the steroid problem is that the standard recommendation has been 5 BD or 10. That is the problem is of course the blood sugar, and on the other side the hypertension. So if the hypertension is well controlled, the blood sugar is well controlled, and 10 is the standard teaching. You have problems in the blood sugar, you may reduce it to 5 milligrams and then see how the patient is doing. If it is a hypertension which is the issue, then 5 may go up to 7.5. So that's one of the dynamics. The second dynamics is the response. Some patients on abipred, they have early started showing response and then started progressing. The prednisolone switch has been seen to work. That is, you convert prednisolone to Visalone, and that or Dexa, let me say, and that does help in a few patients. So these are the only two dynamics that I'm aware of.
Sir, Dr. Umesh is asking if patient is stable for 2 years on abiraterone therapy, should we continue to keep on giving it, or there is any cutoff time?
No, there is no window. There is no window therapy that you give a drug-free trial for a few months. No, you should not do it.
Okay. Yeah, Dr. Rahul.
Sir, you mentioned it earlier that if a patient is on enzalutamide and he is failing within 2-3 months, he is most likely to fail with abiraterone. A similar way, if somebody is on abiraterone, I mean, he is failing in 3 months, most likely he might fail with enzalutamide. One question is this, sir. And another question, and do you practice molecular profiling in the form of V7 splice variants if somebody is failing on abiraterone in 3 months' time?
So let's take the second question first. So ARV7
Splice variants.
Yeah, this anomaly was to choose whether I should start with DOSI or I should start with any of the these ARTs. The question is basically one, availability. It's not easily available. The second is the authenticity of the test, because they are doing it on the DNA circulating CTC cells. They take out their DNA, look at this, and then give you an answer. to my mind, the evidence initially was a lot of gung-ho that yes, if you have this test, it works. And the initial data was from MSKCC. Other centers, when they tried to find out its validity, their results were not really satisfactory. So personally, I've got zero experience in this matter. But I heard recently that ARV splice variant sequencing is now becoming more and more first line in the selection of the initial chemotherapy. Right. So, and what is the second part?
The second part is, sir, if somebody is failing on abiraterone within 3 months' time,
Yes.
do you switch him? Do you want to switch him to docetaxel, or you would try enzalutamide?
Yeah. So, see, the question is, if there's an early failure, as you correctly pointed out, Enza also may not work. So, it is best to counsel him at this point to actively consider docetaxel. If he has received already dosi earlier and then you have introduced Abi and he has failed early, then this is exactly the kind of candidate which was talked about in the CARD trial. So what did they say? That you do not look at Enza any further, straight away talk about cabazitaxel. That is the only drug which is likely to give you meaningful third line response.
So there is a question by Mushtaq Ahmed. He's asking ketoconazole, is ketoconazole having any role
Yes.
in current scenario?
Certainly, ketoconazole is Abi. In a way, it is like what we're talking about is Abitron. The problem was initially ketoconazole was used because in the absence of the availability of Abitron, ketoconazole was the drug that was used. It fell out of favor because of the hepatotoxicity. But I'm aware that some clinicians still feel that ketoconazole has a role when the drug was at the 75 or 80,000 per month price point. Now you have got Abitron generics available at about 10,000 range. So I don't think we should talk in today's practice to use ketoconazole in lieu of Abitron.
Okay. So there is a question by Dr. Nitesh Jain. He's asking, what is your experience in terms of patient response while using low dose and full dose abiraterone?
I have always counseled on the full dose part of it. Okay, but yes, if I off the cuff remember, there's just one patient. He was not able to afford the therapy, though he was showing response. Then that patient, we told him you can go to half dose. But I always try to recommend them at least to go to full dose. See, and the cost of therapy today is, like I'm trying to say repeatedly, is not very high. About 10,000 a month is the cost that it comes to the patient. So, and I believe some drug companies are some support is being provided by the drug companies also to the patients. So I think we should actually counsel them that try to stick to the standard therapy. If not, then add this fatty meal kind of concept to reduce your drug, but bioavailability remains same.
Thank you so much, sir.